Have you ever observed that the most compassionate individuals you've encountered are often the most profoundly weary? The ones who are always present, who always offer a smile, who invariably say yes when you request their aid. But if you look with genuine intention, if you truly pay heed, you can perceive the exhaustion etched in their eyes. You can detect that somewhere beneath that benevolence lies something more profound, more burdensome, perhaps even something more somber. We frequently conceive of kindness as this immaculate, uncomplicated virtue. We instruct our children to be kind. We esteem kindness in our leaders. We measure our own decency by the depth of compassion we can manifest. But kindness, akin to every other intricate facet of our world, casts a shadow. And when you choose to ignore that shadow, when you feign its non-existence, kindness itself can warp into something ruinous. It begins inconspicuously. A child discerns that being kind, being compliant, is what wins them affection. When they set aside their own preferences to ensure others are comfortable, they are met with smiles, with accolades, perhaps even with a warmth they would not have received otherwise. In time, this learned association embeds itself deep within their nervous system. Kindness transforms into a mode of survival. And as they mature, it becomes increasingly difficult to delineate who they are from what others require them to be. They become the reliable figure, the good person, the friend who never voices a complaint. But here is the unvarnished truth. When kindness is coerced, when it is propelled by a terror of rejection or an acute need to be deemed valuable, it ceases to be pure kindness. It becomes a facade. And facades, when worn for too long, begin to asphyxiate the person concealed beneath them. Reflect on the people in your own life who are endlessly benevolent. They will absorb your problems for hours on end. They will help you move. They will loan you money they do not possess. They will forego their own essential rest merely to confirm that you are all right. At first, this behavior seems admirable, even saintly. But if you have ever been that person, if you have inhabited that role, you are aware of the reality. Lurking behind every gesture of self-abnegation is a quiet, brewing resentment, a voice that whispers, "But what about me?" That voice, however, is frequently stifled because kindness, especially the chronic variety, arrives with an unspoken mandate. You are not permitted to place yourself first. Psychologists have explored this phenomenon, and it has a designation: compassion fatigue. It describes the process wherein an individual dispenses so much of their empathy, so much of their care, that they eventually find themselves emotionally barren. Healthcare professionals face it, educators face it, even parents face it. But it is not confined to vocations. Ordinary people, those who identify as kind souls, are just as susceptible. Studies demonstrate that people who consistently subordinate their own needs to those of others report higher incidences of anxiety, depression, and even tangible physical health issues compared to those who preserve a balance. Kindness, when left unregulated, becomes self-erasure. And that is the dark side. Kindness devoid of boundaries is not kindness whatsoever. It becomes a subtle expression of self-destruction. It is analogous to watering every single plant in a garden, but forgetting your own roots. Eventually, the gardener collapses, and the entire garden withers as a consequence. But here is the more disquieting aspect. Sometimes, kindness itself is honed into a weapon. And I am not referring to the obvious way, such as someone feigning niceness for manipulative ends. I mean the more subdued, more unconscious method. When you are renowned as the kind one, people learn to expect it. They depend on it. They structure their own behavior around your pliability, and, without ever consciously realizing it, your kindness is instructing others that your needs are secondary, that your feelings are negotiable. In time, people cease to even ask what you desire, because they simply assume you will invariably adapt to them. The kind person ends up conditioning the world to look right through them. This fosters a paradox. The kinder you are, the more invisible you become. And invisibility is not peace. It is loneliness masquerading as politeness. Now, none of this implies that kindness is inherently bad. Far from it. Genuine kindness is one of the most sublime forces in the universe. But there is a profound distinction between kindness that flows from abundance and kindness that bleeds from emptiness. One heals, the other corrodes. One is sourced from love, the other from fear. Let us examine some facts. In a study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, researchers discovered that individuals who struggle to say no, often those who identify as kind and agreeable, are significantly more likely to experience burnout. Another study from the University of Berkeley confirmed that altruistic behavior enhances well-being, but only when it is voluntary and authentic. When kindness is enacted out of guilt, obligation, or the dread of disappointing others, it has the precise opposite effect, actively lowering happiness and increasing stress.
And yet, so many of us become ensnared in this cycle. We do not want to let anyone down, so we continue to say yes. We do not want to be regarded as selfish, so we continue to give. We do not want to forfeit love, so we continue to sacrifice. But the toll of this ceaseless kindness is enormous. Incrementally, you begin to lose definition of yourself. You no longer even know what you want, because your entire identity has been forged around serving others. You become a foreigner in your own skin. And this is precisely where the monster within makes its entrance. Because when you suppress your needs, when you disown your anger, when you bury your boundaries in the name of kindness, those emotions do not simply evaporate. They accumulate in the shadows, they ferment, and eventually they surface in ways you cannot foresee or manage. Perhaps it is snapping at someone you love over something insignificant. Perhaps it is passive-aggressive commentary, resentment leaking out in subtle ways. Or perhaps it is even darker, years of repressed feelings detonating all at once, leaving you stunned at the person you have become. We prefer to imagine that kindness insulates us from darkness, but in reality, kindness without honesty creates the perfect breeding ground for it. Because every single time you say yes when you mean no, every time you force a smile when you want to cry, every time you withhold your truth to make someone else comfortable, you are not being kind. You are abandoning yourself. And abandonment always carries consequences. Now let's be frank. Why do we do this? Why do kind people struggle so profoundly with boundaries? The answer is embedded in our culture. From a tender age, many of us are conditioned to believe that kindness equals worthiness, that being agreeable is safer than being authentic, that love is earned by what we give, not by who we are. Children who mature in environments where love is conditional, where affection is contingent on performance, obedience, or self-sacrifice, often carry this belief system into adulthood. They become adults who confuse people-pleasing with kindness. But true kindness does not erase the self. True kindness includes the self. If your kindness is costing you your mental health, your joy, or your energy, then it is not kindness anymore. It is self-neglect disguised as virtue. And this is where the education must come in. Neuroscience informs us the brain possesses something called the mirror neuron system. It is the mechanism that permits us to feel empathy. When you witness someone in pain, your brain activates as if you are in pain too. That is why kindness feels so innate to us as humans. We are physiologically hardwired to connect. But here's the catch. Mirror neurons do not distinguish between healthy empathy and destructive empathy. If you perpetually expose yourself to the suffering of others without any protective barriers, your brain essentially floods itself with stress signals. Over time, this precipitates chronic stress responses, immune system dysfunction, and emotional exhaustion. In other words, your brain is not constructed for endless, boundaryless kindness. It is constructed for balanced connection. So the dark side of kindness is not that kindness itself is flawed. It is that kindness can be twisted by fear, by conditioning, by culture, by our own unhealed wounds into something that looks noble on the surface, but is slowly consuming us alive from the inside. And when that happens, the very thing we imagined was our greatest strength becomes the very thing that breaks us. Now, let us pause and reflect here.
If you have ever felt this, the exhaustion, the resentment, the sense of being invisible, even though everyone labels you so kind, you are not alone. You are not broken. You are not defective. What you are experiencing is the natural consequence of a world that does not instruct us on how to balance the act of giving with the act of protecting ourselves. It is the monster within, not because you are bad, but because unexpressed truths will eventually demand to be seen. And this brings us to the crucial question: how do we embrace kindness without permitting it to destroy us? How do we remain compassionate without transforming into martyrs? How do we love others without abandoning ourselves? So how do we achieve this? How do we embrace kindness in a manner that heals instead of harms? The answer is found in one simple but deeply uncomfortable truth. Kindness must begin with you. Not in a selfish disregard for others' manner, but in the understanding that if your kindness does not encompass yourself, then it is not truly kindness at all. It is performance. And performance eventually collapses. Think of it this way. If you have ever flown on an airplane, you know the safety instructions. In emergency, you must put your own oxygen mask on first before assisting others. At first glance, that advice feels almost wrong, almost unnatural. Why would I not help my child or my loved one first? But the logic is undeniable. If you pass out from lack of oxygen, you cannot help anyone. The exact same principle applies to kindness. If you neglect your own needs, your own rest, your own well-being, your ability to truly care for others eventually suffocates. And this is where boundaries enter the picture. And boundaries for many kind-hearted people feel terrifying. Boundaries feel like rejection. They feel like selfishness. They feel like shutting people out. But in reality, boundaries are the purest form of honesty. A boundary says, this is what I am capable of giving, and this is what I am not. It says, my love is real, but it cannot exist if I am empty. It says, I care enough to show you my limits, because without them, my care will inevitably rot into resentment. Psychologists describe boundaries as the invisible lines that define where you end and where another person begins. Without those lines, relationships blur into dependency, manipulation, or silent suffering. With them, relationships become clear, mutual, and grounded in respect. In fact, research indicates that people who set healthy boundaries often experience deeper, more meaningful relationships because their kindness is derived from choice, not from compulsion. And here's another fact. People who respect their own boundaries are actually perceived as more trustworthy. Why? Because when they say yes, you know they truly mean it. Their kindness is not forced. It is authentic, and authenticity is magnetic. But here is the challenge. Setting boundaries is not just about saying no to others. It's about saying yes to yourself. And that can feel uncomfortable if you have spent your entire life equating your worth with your selflessness. It can feel like you're betraying the very identity that people admire you for. You might even lose relationships in the process. Some people won't like it when you stop overextending yourself. Some will push back, accuse you of changing, maybe even withdraw from you. And that's painful. But it's also necessary, because relationships built on the expectation of your endless giving were never truly balanced in the first place. Now, let's dig a little deeper into the psychology. There is a concept known as pathological altruism. It describes what happens when the desire to help actually causes harm, either to the giver or the receiver. For example, when someone sacrifices their health to care for others, or when constant rescuing prevents the other person from ever learning independence. Pathological altruism looks like kindness, but it creates dependency, guilt, and exhaustion. It is quite literally kindness gone wrong. This ties into something even bigger, the cultural myth of the good person. Many societies idealize kindness as the highest virtue, but often in a way that subtly encourages self-erasure. Think about how often we hear phrases like, she's such a good girl, she never causes trouble, or he's such a nice guy, he always helps everyone.
Hidden in those compliments is a dangerous assumption that goodness means never making demands, never saying no, never disrupting the peace. But real goodness is not about erasing yourself. It's about showing up as your full, authentic self and still choosing compassion. When kindness comes from authenticity, it liberates. When it comes from fear, it enslaves. So, what can you do, practically, to shift from enslaved kindness to liberated kindness? Here are some strategies, not as quick fixes, but as lifelong practices.
First, practice the pause. When someone asks something of you, do not immediately say yes. Take a breath. Give yourself space to check in with your own needs. Ask, do I have the energy for this? Do I want to do this? Is this request aligned with my values? Even a few seconds of reflection can save you from automatic people-pleasing. Second, learn the power of the gentle no. A no does not have to be harsh. It can be compassionate and kind. I care about you, but I cannot take this on right now. Or, I'd love to help, but I do not have the capacity. The world will not fall apart if you say no. In fact, the more honest you are, the more people will respect your yeses. Third, reframe your worth. Your value is not determined by how much you give away. Your value is intrinsic. You existed before anyone needed you, before you learned to perform kindness to survive. You are worthy of love even when you say no, even when you rest, even when you take nothing on your shoulders. Fourth, tend to your own garden. Fill yourself with the things that nourish you, friendships that feed your soul, creative pursuits, moments of stillness. When you live from abundance rather than scarcity, kindness flows naturally. It is not forced, it is not depleting, it becomes a gift rather than a transaction. And fifth, allow yourself to feel the harder emotions. Anger, frustration, sadness. These are not enemies of kindness. They are signals. They tell you when your boundaries are being crossed, when your needs are being ignored. If you suppress them, they morph into the monster within. But if you acknowledge them, if you listen, they become guides that point you toward balance. Let us return to the metaphor of masks. For many people, kindness has become a lifelong mask. The smile you wear to cover the exhaustion, the yes you give to avoid conflict, the generosity you perform to prove your worth. But masks are heavy, and the longer you wear them, the harder it becomes to remember what your own face looks like. The real journey is not to throw away kindness, but to remove the mask and let kindness come from the real you, the you that can say yes and no with equal honesty, the you that is kind without disappearing. There is an old saying, if you want to know who you truly are, look at how you treat yourself when no one is watching. That is where authentic kindness begins, not in the approval of others, not in the praise of being the nice one, but in the quiet choices you make for your own well-being. Do you rest when you are tired? Do you forgive yourself when you fail? Do you speak to yourself with compassion? If not, then your kindness to others is built on a fragile foundation. The irony is this: when you treat yourself with true kindness, your kindness toward others becomes more powerful, not less, because it comes from overflow, not depletion. It inspires rather than exhausts. It invites others to rise with you instead of leaning on you endlessly. And maybe that is the final lesson here. The dark side of kindness is not about rejecting kindness, it is about transforming it from a mask into a mirror, from compulsion into choice, from survival into love. So, the next time someone tells you that you are so kind, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, is this kindness coming from fear or from freedom? From exhaustion or from abundance? From the mask or from the real me? The answer to that question will tell you more about yourself than any compliment ever could. Because at the end of the day, the monster within kind people is not their anger, not their limits, not their boundaries.
The real monster is self-neglect. And once you face it, once you set down the mask, you'll discover that your kindness does not disappear. It only grows stronger, sharper, more radiant. It becomes the kind of kindness that does not just keep others alive, but keeps you alive too. And maybe that is the ultimate kindness, to live fully as yourself, without erasing, without performing, without apologizing. To show the world that compassion does not mean self-erasure. It means truth. That is the kind of kindness the world needs most. Not endless yeses, not silent suffering, but the courage to love without losing.